Hi everyone, we're here today to talk about themes and symbolism in Alfred Hitchcock's Rear Window. Today the content will be geared towards analytical response to text. Let's start by looking at the idea of gender in Hitchcock's 1954 film. More specifically, let's start with Lisa and Jeff's relationship. The film portrays a complex view on gender relations, particularly the treatment of marriage or courting. It's through Jeff's really vocal comments that the film gives voice to a belief that perhaps men and women are incompatible and that the lives that they lead do not intersect as simply as someone like Stella has put it, where you just meet each other and it all works out for the best. The major conflict in Jeff and Lisa's relationship has been established by the fact that he can't really think of a life where he's able to continue with his hard living career as a freelance photographer while maintaining a committed relationship with this beautiful, fashion-minded young woman. He just can't see how Lisa can fit into his current life. And he thinks quite honestly that she will inhibit his freedoms. To fully commit to her, he feels at the beginning of the film, he will have to give up his role. Not just his role as in a photographer, but the role of being the controller, the voyeur, the person who has been able to establish this life for himself, go around the world viewing the things he wants to view. And he just refuses to do this. He says, "You just have to face it, Lisa. You are not meant for this type of life." Well, we'll see about that. Lisa spends a lot of time during the film trying to gain Jeff's attention. She even asks, how far does a girl have to go before you notice her? She dresses up for him. She wears provocative clothing, prepares beautiful meals, provides drinks for him. But it's not just the broken leg that's the issue. Even though he is housebound, she has him, but she cannot compete with the interest he has for the neighbours. In many ways, his voyeurism is linked to his impotence. He's more interested in telling her theories about what's happening with the neighbours because he's so frustrated at being stuck in the cast and stuck in the chair, stuck in his house. Even Lisa threatens him, going, "If you don't stop it, I'm getting out of here." And this simply doesn't get through to Jeff. It is not until she starts actively engaging and participating in his voyeuristic fantasy that he changes the way he looks at her. She says, "Let's start from the beginning again, Jeff. Tell me everything you saw and what you think it means." However, Jeff does change throughout this text, and it's important to note that what Hitchcock is saying about gender roles is not simple, it's not clear, and he presents a female lead who is quite strong and confident. Despite the fact that Jeff is often quite degrading towards Lisa, she still remains committed to him. Therefore, it keeps her in control in the film. Lisa's love and devotion at the start doesn't seem enough for him, and he's quite stubborn and emotionally distant. But as we've just said, his interest increases when she starts to engage in the mystery. She speculates alongside Jeff about Thorwald's motives for killing his wife. And Jeff becomes really pleased with this and her reasoning. He asks her to come here and kiss him and wraps his arms around her lovingly, showing this interesting side to Lisa that Jeff didn't realize that she quite had. He had really stereotyped her as someone who was all about fashion and design and the finer things in life, but her intelligence is really starting to become appealing to Jeffries. Lisa finally seals her place in Jeff's life when she physically enters his fantasy world. So while there aren't a lot of quotes for this section of the film, you can talk about how Hitchcock constructs the change in Jeff and Lisa's relationship, how he shows that Lisa is brave and strong. And that's through the fact that she climbs into Thorwald's apartment. Jeffries can watch her as equally as well through his camera lens. And you could talk about the different shots used by Alfred Hitchcock here. While Thorwald comes upon Lisa in his house, she puts herself in physical danger. This is appealing to Jeffries, who lives quite a dangerous lifestyle. Yet he is still very protective of Lisa, and he doesn't quite realise until this moment comes about how much he deeply cares for her. Lisa also finds Mrs. Thorwald's wedding band, and she indicates this to Jeffries that she has it by standing with her back to the window and gesturing to her hand. Not only is she revealing the evidence, this is a symbolic gesture. She wants to be married to Jeff, and the act of wearing the ring fulfills her own fantasy. But this scene tells us a lot. It tells us a lot about Lisa's bravery and courage. It tells us a lot about Jeffrey's gaze and his theory being correct. It's an important scene to come back to, even though there are very few quotations. But what are some other scenes that you may wish to rewatch and look at again when it comes to the ideas of the role of women, gender, or masculinity in this text? You may wish to look into Stella and her role to care for Jeff. Look at the initial scenes, look at their relationship there and how Stella fills quite a traditional role. Jeffries also views a number of his neighbours. You have the newlyweds fulfilling the role of traditional husband and wife on the far left. You have Jeffries viewing Miss Torso, the young ballerina, across from him and her entertaining of different men in her apartment. You have on the lower level on the right-hand side, Miss Lonely Hearts and her desire to find love. And then, of course, the complexities of the relationship between Mrs. Thorwald and Mr. Thorwald. That first interaction that Jeffries views where she tosses aside the rose on the tray that he's brought in and the consequence nagging and fighting is a really interesting scene to unpack in terms of gender roles. While on the surface of the film, it is about a man who thinks he's witnessed a murder. On a deeper level, this is a film about different relationships. Miss Lonely Hearts, Miss Torso, and Anna Thorwald are all possible future identities or pathways for Lisa and Jeffrey's relationship. Let's have a look at Miss Lonely Hearts. This is the character you can see in the photograph there. As Miss Lonely Heart sets a table for two, putting bottles of wine on the table and lighting candles for her fantasy boyfriend, Lisa prepares to wine and dine Jeffries. Jeff raises a glass in toast to Miss Lonely Hearts with his back to Lisa, and this is unanswered. It reflects his own loneliness and isolation. He's unable to commit to Lisa and maintains an emotional distance from her. Could we see Lisa being Miss Lonely Hearts in her future? Maybe if she continues with Jeffries, and maybe if Jeffries doesn't change. Then we have Miss Torso. Jeff makes a comment about a similarity between the apartments of Miss Torso and Lisa, saying, "We have a little apartment here that's probably about as popular as yours." Miss Torso is serving drinks and entertaining 3 male suitors in her apartment. Lisa's perspective is in contrast to Jeff. She sees Miss Torso as doing a woman's hardest job, juggling wolves. This contrast in perspective on the life of Miss Torso just shows the emotional distance between Lisa and Jeff, as well as the impact that expectations of women place on their relationship. Lisa understands, she gets what it is to be a single woman living in this era. Jeffries doesn't. Anna Thorwald. Now we only see Anna for a brief snippet, but what we see is an intense and unhappy marriage between Lars and Anna. This piques Jeff's interest. This is what he expects married life would be like. Anna nags Lars when he puts that rose on her dinner tray. She tosses it away. This shows how discontented she is in that relationship. She listens in on his phone calls. She mocks him in the last scene that we see of her alive. We can kind of understand where Jeffries is coming from if this was the way that all marriages were. But this is a complex relationship, one that ends in murder. This is not Jeff and Lisa, but could it be? Let's shift to a different theme. Not only is this a text about gender and relationships, but it's also about voyeurism and whether that is a moral thing to be doing. Basically, voyeurism is the illicit pleasure of watching something unfold upon others without that someone having an awareness that someone is watching them. This is a central theme in Rear Window. The film demonstrates the idea that prying into the lives of others in this way is unethical. It's intrusive, it's unlawful. However, the film also explores how acts of neighbourliness and community are brought upon by a protagonist who is spying on them. What if Jeffries wasn't watching? Would Thorwald have gotten away with murder? Is it the right thing to be doing? Is it okay now that he's uncovered a crime? Firstly, Jeff watches his neighbours and monitors their activities. He does this to satisfy his own need to control others. It resolves his own fears, and he likes spying on people's desires. His barely suppressed rage at Lisa and his comically large telephoto lens paint a picture of a man desperately trying to reclaim his former masculine dominance. He's very short with Lisa when he speaks to her in the opening scenes. He is, in some ways, a man who's been completely emasculated by the accident that he's had, and he's feeling a lack of control over his life. He says in a conversation with his boss, "If you don't pull me out of this swamp of boredom, I'm going to do something drastic. I'm going to get married, and then I'll never be able to go anywhere." We can tell from this comment alone that Jeffries is really struggling with the predicament that he's in, and this is what leads him to his voyeuristic acts. As he watches his neighbours, Jeff gives them nicknames. He categorises them on the basis of what he sees on the surface. It's quite judgmental, and that's something that we need to consider. He's just seeing the outside of the cover. For instance, he's convinced that the young, beautiful Miss Torso, who's always surrounded by men, is happy, and that she is focused on finding the richest and most successful man to settle down with. Again, he makes that assumption from watching her. He doesn't overhear any of these conversations. It's just by looking, this is what he believes. Lisa, however, knows that Miss Torso isn't happy, and she isn't interested in how a man looks or how wealthy he is. Love is very important to her. I feel that Lisa is projecting a lot of what she wants onto Miss Torso to get to this conclusion. And we've had those two quotes before about how she's like a queen bee with her pick of the drones, and that Lisa disagrees. Jeff also labels Miss Torso an eat, drink and be merry girl when he's talking to Stella. And she warns him about making conclusions about who people are, what they feel and what they're thinking based on superficial observations. You need to look beneath the surface for that type of information. And we know that both Lisa and Stella are correct when Miss Torso at the end of the film welcomes home her love Stanley, a chubby soldier with glasses. Jeffries didn't get it right this time. It's important to note that when we look at this film, we're seeing it from Jeff's perspective. Now, Jeffries falls asleep. In fact, we, the audience, see a small snippet of Lars leaving the apartment with a woman. Jeffries misses that. He is only able to see as far as what he can see with his binoculars or his camera lens from his apartment. When the other neighbours turn off the lights or when they close the blinds, he doesn't know what's happening. He also can't hear anything that's happening. As such, we need to question Jeff's subjectivity. Does he really know what's going on? do we really know what's going on? We only have a few pieces of the puzzle. We could argue that Jeff makes exaggerated, superficial interpretations, judgments and conclusions about his neighbours, and that maybe what he's developing is an irrational sense of suspicion because he's kept up. We see this scene here on the right-hand side where he's called in his friend Detective Tom Doyle to also come in and view his neighbours. Now, Doyle has a different perspective. He says it could be any number of things. Murder is the least possible. And that people do a lot of things in private that they couldn't possibly explain in private. We need to consider that Jeff doesn't know everything and that at times he does get it wrong. Particularly when Thorwald's wife goes missing. Jeff is convinced that he has murdered her. Doyle has to caution him because he's only viewing it from a distance and things aren't always what they seem to be. Jeff is so certain. He starts saying things like, because everything this fella's done has been suspicious. Trips in the dark, in the rain, knives, saws, trunks and ropes. And a normal person listening to Jeffrey speak this way is going to be slightly concerned. Even Lisa says that his voyeurism probably isn't the way to go about things. She says doing it the way you're doing it with binoculars and wild opinions about every little thing you see is diseased. So we have to keep in mind that the way other people react to Jeffries is probably justified. You and I sitting outside, looking out the window, are probably not going to come up and actually see a murder. So that's it for themes. You might want to take a quick break, pause this video, and then we will go on talking about deeper symbols within the text. This will help you to make your essay really detailed. You could talk about Jeffrey's broken leg. What does it mean? What does it represent? We know that Jeff is unable to move around, and he's not really capable of investigating the happenings of the apartment block on his own. As such, he's reliant on the women in the film, Lisa and Stella, to take active roles in the investigation. The leg forces him to rely on women and have the gender roles reversed, where Stella and Lisa become essentially the heroines of the film. He's basically been relegated to a more passive role of the watcher. The broken leg can therefore be viewed as a symbol of Jeff's powerlessness and an emasculation of this very proud man. He's portrayed as both physically and sexually impotent. The cast itself could be considered a castration of Jeff. For example, Jeff is unable to assist Lisa when she's being attacked by Thorwald. His inability to feel attraction towards Lisa when she's being seductive. But also you could talk about the fact that Jeffries is quite powerless when Thorwald first attempts to attack him in his apartment, but then he comes up with a pretty good plan. Then we have Jeffrey's camera. As a photographer, it makes sense that Jeff has a range of cameras and is skilled in observation. However, while the camera is a key element of the mise-en-scene throughout the film, Jeff actually doesn't take a single photo. Instead, the camera becomes a symbol of the emotional distance he puts between himself and those on the other side of the lens. It's a physical barrier. He sees himself as being different from his neighbours, when in fact, the different people he observes teach him something about himself and about his relationship with Lisa. Conversely, Jeff's long focus camera lens is a symbol of his passive male gaze. Just as his broken leg traps him, the camera transports him outside of his apartment. It highlights a somewhat perverse nature of seeking enjoyment through watching others. Then we have the cigarette box. You may not have noticed this in the original film, so it's worth going back and having a look at this key scene. You may also think, why? Why is this relevant? It highlights the differences between Jeff and Lisa. It also highlights how Lisa is a different woman to many of the women in the 1950s. You could consider Jeff like his original cigarette box. His original cigarette box is old and cracked. It's not smooth, it's not easy. And Lisa suggests swapping it with a plain, flat silver one, which is quite expensive as well. It kind of compares and contrasts who Jeff is and who Lisa wants him to be. Jeff isn't this upper class bloke. He's rough around the edges. He lives a really interesting free lifestyle. And Lisa lives quite an upper class lifestyle. It links to the theme of appearance and reality. Does it really matter what type of cigarette box he has? And also the idea of not judging a person by their external appearance. Should Lisa be judging the cigarette box? Is it fine just to leave Jeffries with what he's got? Does she need to fix it up for him? If we look at it from a different perspective, it shows how Lisa is a modern woman. It shows her financial independence. She has her own inherent power that comes with having her own money. She can buy really expensive dresses. She can also upgrade Jeff's cigarette box to a silver one. She obviously isn't reading the room too well, because while she thinks that buying nice things for Jeffrey would be a really traditional way of getting him on her side, he's not a man that really wants expensive replacements. Also, her wealth is a threat to Jeff's masculinity. So it's worth having a look at this as a representation of their relationship. Sorry. Lastly, we have the thermometer. Again, you may not have noticed this in your first viewing of the film. The thermometer is viewed as a degree of the rising action of the film. It could also be seen as a metaphor for Jeff's anxiety. Go back and have a look. As the drama continues to increase, this thermometer goes up as well. These are all really great tips that you can add to your writing to make it more complex. At this level, we're expecting more than just the plot, so the characters and the events. We want to hear about the themes and we want to hear about the symbols. If you can even add just some of this to your work, it would go a long way in improving your marks. All the best.